Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the History AI podcast, where we time travel through the weird, wonderful, and sometimes worrisome corners of the past. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Today we're warming our hands over a fresh grave, historically speaking. We're talking about the New England vampire panic, a wave of 18th and 19th century exhumations and anti-vampire rituals in New England.
Quick favor before we dig in. Hit subscribe and drop us a 5-star rating. It seriously helps the show grow and puts spooky smart history in more ears.
Also, our episodes are evergreen, perfect anytime you press play, and the show runs on the latest AI architecture under the hood, so you get fast, efficient storytelling every week.
Oh, and stick around after the credits. We're premiering our original song, Cold Earth and Candlelight.
Stakes ready, metaphorically. Let's begin.
To understand why New Englanders turned to anti-vampire rituals, you have to start with consumption, what we now call tuberculosis. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic killer. It was a slow thief. People would grow pale and thin, run fevers at night, sweat through their sheets, and cough, sometimes with bright threads of blood that stained handkerchiefs and pillows. Families watched the same pattern repeat. One sibling fades, then another, then a parent. It could take months or years, which made it feel like something, or someone, was actively draining the household.
The language of the time tells you how it felt. Folks spoke of being wasted, declining, or having galloping consumption when the disease moved fast. If a family had a string of deaths, neighbors didn't just see tragedy, they saw a ravenous pattern. Without germ theory in the everyday toolkit, people looked for explanations they could hold. Some blamed bad air and damp houses. Others thought certain families were cursed. And in a few towns, the belief took hold that an afflicted relative, newly dead, might still be feeding on the living from the grave.
Remember the world we're in: rural farms and mill villages, long winters, limited medical care. Doctors might visit, but treatments ranged from rest and tonics to poultices and cordials, comforting but not cures. Churches offered prayers. Newspapers carried alarming accounts from other towns. In that environment, a ritual, however grim, felt like action. You could do something to protect the people you loved.
Here's how it typically played out. A family loses one or two members, and a third is clearly wasting. Whispers begin. A neighbor, a relative, sometimes even a community leader suggests an exhumation. The logic was simple and terrifying. If the newly dead looked too fresh, perhaps they were the source. Winter made this more likely. Bodies stored in crypts or buried in frozen ground decomposed slowly, so a face might still look flushed, a heart still hold dark fluid, to people desperate for a sign that looked like proof.
The ritual varied by place. Often, the coffin was opened with a small crowd present. Family, a few neighbors, maybe the town doctor who didn't endorse it but couldn't stop it. They'd look for signs: unfaded color in the cheeks, liquid blood in the heart, little or no decay. If suspicion stuck, they removed the heart and sometimes the liver. Those organs were burned, either at the graveside or at a nearby forge. The smoke, in their minds, severed the connection between the dead and the living.
And there was a second, even more intimate step. The ashes from the burned organs might be mixed into a tonic, water, wine, or a bitter brew, and given to the sick relative to drink. It sounds shocking now, but to them it was a last-ditch antidote, a way to neutralize the unseen force that was wasting their loved one. It's crucial to see the emotion here. This wasn't cruelty. It was grief weaponized into ritual.
Also, these choices cut across class lines more than you'd expect. We picture superstition as a purely backwoods thing, but fear respects no diploma. Merchants, farmers, educated families, they all face the same slow catastrophe and the same social pressure. If everyone around you believed an exhumation might save your son or your sister, if the whole town was waiting to see whether you'd act, refusing could feel like signing a death warrant.
Meanwhile, daily life kept grinding on. The sick stayed home, often in the same bed where someone else had died of the same symptoms months before. Mothers tended ill children while coughing themselves. Siblings traded turns warming broth and washing linens. Windows stayed shut against the cold, which meant stale, cramped rooms with multiple people breathing the same air. That's a perfect recipe for a contagious lung disease, even if nobody had the words for it yet.
Put it all together, and you get a landscape of dread. Lingering illness, repeating deaths, long winters that preserved bodies in eerie ways, and communities convinced that the dead were still somehow present. That's the tinder. The exhumations and heart-burnings, those were the sparks, acts of control in a world that felt like it was slipping away.
How does a community get from grief to grave opening? Start with folklore, stories that outlive their tellers. New England inherited Old World whispers about the restless dead, mixed them with local ghost traditions, and stored them next to everyday remedies in the family toolbox. When consumption hit a household, that toolbox opened wide. Charms, Bible verses, kitchen cures, and in some towns, a ritual aimed at breaking a bond with the newly dead.
And it didn't always wear the label vampire. People talked about a wasting, a revenant, or simply said the dead were drawing on the living. Different words, same algorithm. If deaths hit a family in sequence, look to the most recently buried, then sever the connection through a specific act. Folklore, in effect, became a step-by-step flowchart.
Newspapers turned that flowchart into a template. 19th century papers reprinted each other constantly. The telegraph sped oddities across states. A vivid graveside account in one weekly could appear in dailies 2 towns over by week's end. Even when editors scolded the practice, printing it made it feel familiar. And familiarity can look a lot like proof during a crisis.
The press didn't just spread the story, it taught people how to see. Articles described fresh organs, lively color, and liquid in the heart as telltale signs. Readers filed those images away. Months later, facing their own slow disaster, neighbors knew what to look for and what to do. The page became a primer for the grave.
Geography tuned the belief. In Rhode Island and southeastern Connecticut, tight villages, thin soils, dense kin networks, news traveled by doorstep and pew. In Vermont's hill towns, hard frost pushed bodies into receiving vaults until spring. Cold delayed decay, making the dead look unsettlingly present. Different landscapes, same conclusion. The place itself collaborated with the fear.
Religion added cross-currents. The stern edges of Puritanism had softened by the 1800s, but its habits remained: self-examination, communal standards, moral readings of misfortune. Some ministers denounced exhumations as superstition. Others stayed pastoral and quiet rather than alienate mourners. You can picture the graveside tension: prayer on one side, hot coals on the other.
Medicine wasn't monolithic either. One country doctor might oppose the ritual, but attend to prevent chaos. Another, juggling humoral ideas and emerging science, might think, it won't help, but it may calm the town. That uneasy truce, professional skepticism meeting public pressure, helped the practice persist longer than you'd expect.
Social mechanics did the rest. Reputation was currency. Turning down a ritual your neighbors believed could save a child wasn't just private, it risked being branded careless. Women, doing most of the caregiving, stood at the center, tracking symptoms, hearing the whispers, weighing the odds. Men hefted shovels and tended the forge, but momentum often began in kitchens and sick rooms.
Seasonality set the rhythm. Winter-sealed windows, crowded rooms, and layered quilts. Perfect conditions for a respiratory disease. Spring revealed unsettling contrasts in the cemetery. One grave settled, another not. One body darkened, another strangely intact. Each difference got logged in the community's mental ledger as evidence.
And memory mapped the panic. Certain family names became shorthand. Crossroads collected reputations. A Brookside cemetery turned into the place you avoid at dusk because that's where they opened the coffins. Landmarks anchored the lore. The forge that burned organs, the stone wall where neighbors argued, the house where the last survivor coughed through winter.
Even the era's itinerant culture, lecturers, pamphleteers, singing school teachers, stitched the pockets together. A teacher could work 3 towns in a season, carrying a satchel of arithmetic problems and 6 fresh stories of what they did back east. Folklore doesn't need good roads. It rides conversation.
Put it all together: old stories, new media, harsh seasons, close communities, and you get a geography of fear. A region primed to see patterns of death, trained by print to recognize signs, and ready to enact a ritual that felt both ancient and urgent. The grave wasn't just a resting place. It was a suspected pipeline, one the living believed they could sever if they acted fast enough.
Let's walk it, town by town, the way a neighbor would have told it by the stove. Picture Exeter, Rhode Island, winter of 1892. Fields crusted with snow, stone walls veined with ice. The Brown family has already buried Mary Eliza, the mother, and Mary Olive, the eldest daughter. Edwin, the son, is coughing himself thin in a boarding house in Providence, sent away in the half-hope that new air might save him. And then Mercy, Lena to her friends, dies during a brutal cold snap. The ground is iron. Her coffin waits in a receiving vault because men can't get shovels into the earth.
Weeks later, a small procession moves toward the cemetery. Neighbors in heavy coats, the local physician, a few men carrying pry bars, and a saw. There's tension that feels like static. No one wants to be the first to say the word, but everyone knows why they've come. 3 coffins are opened in turn. Mary Eliza and Mary Olive show the expected signs of time. Then, Mercy's lid comes free with a groan. Because she's been in the cold, her features are surprisingly intact. Blood has settled and congealed in ways that look, to desperate eyes, like proof of freshness. It's not horror movie spectacle, it's winter physics. But at that moment, it reads like a verdict.
The ritual that follows is strangely quiet. A small fire starts in a brazier. Gloves come off. The heart and liver are removed, heavy with pooled fluid that no one in that circle would describe in medical terms. Organ meets ember. The smoke smells sour and metallic. Someone murmurs a prayer. Someone else stares at their boots. The ashes, once cooled, are saved. Mixed into a draught later, they're pressed into Edwin's hands, bitter, gritty, clinging to the cup. He drinks because what else is left to try?
The saddest part is the calendar. Edwin doesn't rally. He follows the pattern everyone feared, just a few months behind his sister. After the burial, the town does what towns do. The forge cools, the shovels are stored, the story splits into 2 versions, one told with shame, the other with a shrug that says, "We did what we could."
Slide west to Griswold, Connecticut. Jewett City to the locals, mid-1800s. The Ray family lives within earshot of the Quinebaug River and the mills that feed it. Consumption moves through their house like a draft under a door. First one son, then another. The cough that starts as a tickle becomes a metronome you can't stop hearing. Neighbors mark the time between funerals by the wreaths on the door.
When a 3rd family member begins to fade, the town's patience breaks. People talk in the store, on the bridge, at the pump. A cousin swears he's read of a cure. A farmer says he's seen it done down country. There's a meeting that isn't quite a meeting, just enough people in the same kitchen to count as a decision. The graves are opened on a raw day. Coffins come up streaked with mud. This time, the fire is built at the edge of the burying ground, and the forge's lungs heave when someone works the bellows. The organs burn down to char, a handful of gray-black grit in a tin. The tonic goes to the living.
Whether the draught helps is almost beside the point. What matters to the people there is the feeling of having pushed back. In a world where nothing stops the cough, the ritual has a clean, linear story. Identify the source, cut the tie, seal it with fire. When the next winter comes and someone asks, what did they do in Jewett City? The answer is ready, portable, and fierce. They went to the graves, and they fought.
Now climb north to Woodstock, Vermont, earlier in the century. The houses huddle closer to their own chimneys. Frederick Ransom, educated, promising, the kind of young man a town is proud to send away to college, comes home sick. His family watches the same signs. The flush that looks like health until you learn to fear it, the night sweats, the hollowing out around the eyes. Every remedy is tried, broths, rest, careful drafts of fresh air when the weather permits.
When he dies, grief in that house becomes a hard, bright thing. The father is not a man of easy superstition. He's a man of ledgers and obligations. But he's also a father who's done the math of loss and can't solve it. Pressure accumulates, not loud exactly, but constant. Comments at the general store, the pastor's careful visit, a neighbor who insists he's seen the ritual work once anyway. In the end, the choice looks less like a choice and more like an angle of repose.
The forge where the heart is burned throws orange light on snow. Sparks lift and vanish. There's no triumph when the ashes settle, only a thin relief that the town will quiet and a hope, private and ashamed, that such an act might place a shield between the remaining children and the grave. If you listen, You can hear boots scuffing, a throat cleared, someone telling a joke with no punchline, just to release the air.
Along the same coastal routes and farm roads sits another oft-told story, the Tillinghast family in late 18th century Rhode Island. The details vary, as they do when stories travel by mouth, but the shape is familiar. A string of deaths, a town that begins to speak in one voice, and a father or husband led from sorrow to ritual by the gravity of community belief. The heart is lifted from the dark, carried to the light, undone by flame.
What all these scenes share is the choreography, the whispered lead-up, the trudging walk to the cemetery, the moment the lid gives, the inventory of signs, the decision no one wants to own and everyone helps carry out. You can map the roles: who urges, who hesitates, who stokes the fire, who looks away when the blade bites. You can also map the after, the quiet meals, the sheets hung to freeze dry on lines, the way people pause when they pass the burying ground at dusk for weeks afterward.
And the landscape keeps score. Stone walls remember hands that rested there while men argued. The receiving vault remembers how winter preserved a girl's face longer than grief could bear. The forge remembers what it was asked to do in a town that had run out of gentle options. When we say the vampire panic, we aren't talking about capes or castles. We're talking about neighbors who stood in the cold and tried, with smoke and ash, to bargain with a disease they could not name.
The vampire panic doesn't vanish because people suddenly become braver. It fades because explanations get better. In the 1800s, medicine is shifting under everyone's feet. Doctors are arguing over bad air versus contagion. Microscopes are revealing hidden worlds, and a new confidence is building that disease has specific causes. When physicians can point to an organism, tiny, stubborn, and airborne, the story of consumption changes from curse to contact.
That shift shows up first in the clinic and then in the street. Country doctors start carrying stethoscopes, tapping and listening for the hollowed-out sounds of diseased lungs. Sputum, once just a gross nuisance, gets treated like evidence. Spittoons and anti-spitting ordinances appear. Windows get cracked even in winter for fresh air. Tenement reformers talk about ventilation and sunlight. The idea that breath carries risk starts to feel practical, not mystical.
Institutions jump in too. The sanatorium movement spreads: high, dry air, rest, measured nutrition. Hours spent on porches in wool blankets, faces turned to the sun. Whatever their limits, these places hand families a plan, regimen instead of ritual. Public health departments begin contact tracing in a rudimentary way. Who coughed on whom, in which room, with how many people sleeping there. Suddenly the battlefield isn't the graveyard, it's the parlor and the factory floor.
Technology accelerates the divorce from superstition. After the discovery of X-rays, a chest film can show cavitations and shadows where a layperson only hears a cough. Skin tests arrive to reveal exposure before the worst symptoms hit. Later, vaccines offer prevention for some populations, and the first effective antibiotics finally flip the script. Streptomycin, then companion drugs, turn a wasting sentence into a treatable condition. Once your neighbor stops dying of the long cough, the need to fight a revenant evaporates.
Death practices evolve right alongside medicine. After the Civil War, embalming becomes common and professionalized. More bodies are prepared by undertakers than by families at home. Chemical preservation and sealed caskets change what the dead look like. The telltale signs that once convinced people a corpse was too fresh, pooled blood, winter-chilled organs, either don't appear the same way or get interpreted through a medical lens. A doctor can now say, that color is lividity, that firmness is rigor, that moisture is normal, and the crowd believes him.
Law and custom catch up too. Cemeteries standardize management, and receiving vaults see less seasonal use as equipment and roads improve. Town boards get less tolerant of midnight exhumations. Newspapers still love a sensational story, but editors increasingly frame these rituals as relics, not remedies. As professional authority consolidates, health inspectors, medical societies, trained nurses, the social pressure that once pushed a family toward the grave now pushes them toward the clinic.
The emotional landscape changes as well. Families living through consumption stop imagining a single malevolent source and start recognizing a web of risk. Crowded rooms, shared beds, long shifts, poor diet. Grief doesn't disappear, but it's joined by something sturdier: agency shaped by knowledge. You open windows, you boil linens, you isolate the sick when you can, and when the pharmacy finally offers a pill that works, you take it with both hands.
And that's the quiet ending of the panic. Not a dramatic confrontation, but 1,000 small reorientations. Tools in the doctor's bag, laws on the books, habits in the home, that make exhumations feel unnecessary, even unthinkable. Once the living have better weapons, the dead stop being suspects.
When people hear New England vampire, pop culture wants to hand them a cape and a castle. But the story that lingers here is quieter and closer. Family plots, winter vaults, and neighbors who did what they thought might save a life. The myth that grew later, the fanged aristocrat, floats above that reality like fog. On the ground, the figures are parents, siblings, town doctors, and blacksmiths, all pulled into a ritual they hoped would end the dying.
And yet myths have gravity. Once newspapers and dime novels circulated those graveside scenes, they hardened into a shared image, the telltale fresh heart, the fire, the draught. Over time, retellings polished the rough edges. A complicated community decision became a single dramatic moment. Doubts people felt at the time, arguments in kitchens, second thoughts at the cemetery gate, got edited out because the cleaner story traveled better.
That edit shapes how we remember the people involved. The dead become symbols, the vampire of a town, while their lives shrink to a line on a tour map. But if you step back into the family context, you see a longer narrative. Months of nursing, financial strain, wedding plans postponed, siblings pulled from school to help, the slow thinning of a household as chairs at the table go empty. The ritual is just one scene in a much larger play about illness and care.
Memory also settles into places. In some towns, a single stone becomes a waypoint. Visitors leave coins, ribbons, or notes. Caretakers quietly tidy up after them. Local historical societies collect clippings, oral histories, and the odd artifact. There's pride and discomfort mixed together. Pride that the story draws attention, discomfort that it draws the wrong attention if treated like a sideshow. Communities end up negotiating an ethics of remembrance, how to welcome curiosity without turning grief into spectacle.
Forensics added a late chapter. When investigators re-examine historical remains arranged in anti-vampire fashion, bones crossed over the chest, for example, they bring modern tools to an old fear. Isotope analysis, DNA work, and pathology can tell us diet, ancestry, even signs of tuberculosis scarring in the ribs. Those methods don't just solve a mystery, they rehumanize a label. A skeleton once filed under a spooky nickname becomes a farmer with a likely name, an age range, a life lived locally. It's a reversal. Science unwinds the myth to recover the person.
Folklore studies contribute their own nuance. Interviewers who sat in parlors and on porches heard how descendants processed these stories, sometimes with embarrassment, sometimes with stubborn defense, often with a clear-eyed understanding that their ancestors were doing the best they could. Those voices remind us that tradition isn't blind, it's adaptive. Communities retire practices when better answers arrive, but they keep the memory as a cautionary tale about what fear can make reasonable.
Modern media keeps remixing it all. Documentaries, podcasts, novels, and walking tours frame the panic through different lenses. Medical history, gothic mood, true crime structure. Each format asks for different beats, the reveal, the twist, the moral. The risk is flattening the past into entertainment. The opportunity is using that attention to teach the medical and social context the myth usually skips.
And there's a mirror for the present. We still reach for stories when we're afraid. When a threat spreads and the why is murky, rumors sprint ahead of explanations. Communities today don't dig up graves, but we do circulate narratives that assign blame, promise shortcuts, or sell certainty. The New England panic is a reminder to ask, what problem is this story solving for us? Knowledge, control, comfort, and is there a better tool now?
In the end, what remains is a layered memory. A medical disaster interpreted through folklore, then reframed by journalism, then reinterpreted by science, and finally curated by towns that have to live with the legend. If you visit those cemeteries, you're not walking through a horror tale. You're walking through the history of how people explain the inexplicable and how those explanations change as our tools improve.
Which might be the most durable lesson here. Myths are not the opposite of truth. They're the stories we use to hold our lives together until better truths arrive. When they do, the best we can do is retire the ritual, keep the empathy, and remember the people at the center of the panic as neighbors first, legends second.
That's our tour through the New England vampire panic, where grief, folklore, winter physics, and microbiology collided.
If you liked this ride, do us a solid, rate and review the show. Those 5-star reviews really help us grow and reach more curious minds.
Hit subscribe, share this episode with a friend who loves spooky history, and remember, all our episodes are evergreen, perfect for your long drives, late-night dishwashing, or cemetery strolls. Consume responsibly.
Got a topic you want us to tackle? Drop suggestions on our socials. We read every message. Also, we've got brand new merch, stickers, teas, the whole crypt. Link in the show notes.
Special thanks to all of you listening right now. You're the reason we get to do this every week. We'll be back with more history that bites, figuratively.
For the History AI podcast, I'm Marco.
I'm Chuck. Stay curious and maybe leave the neighbors in their graves.
Frost never fades. They whisper her name through the willow and graves. Mercy Brown's lumber, the town's last light. They dug up her coffin on a February night. The doctor said fever, but the preacher said curse. And fear spreads faster than the body grows worse. Cold earth and candlelight, they swore she still breathed. Ashes to ashes, what won't the heart believe? From Exeter to Salem, they'll blame the dead for the pain when the living can't let go. The dead take the blame. Father's pale in the lamplight, his cough won't rest, so they open her grave to quiet his chest. And daughter's heartburn mixed with prayer and shame. They drank her ashes thinking health would remain. It's mercy they called her, though mercy was none. When fear grips the winter, the mind comes undone. Cold earth and candlelight, they swore she still breathed. Ashes to ashes, what won't the heart believe? From Exeter to Salem, they'll blame the dead for the pain when the living can't let go. The dead take the blame. Grave by grave, they dug through the night. Lanterns like ghosts, a trembling sight. But